If you could sort of brief me in your own words about the release that we got with this report.
So the process started at the beginning part of July, and the idea was to look at the last 15 years of officer-involved shootings and analyze it from a couple different perspectives. We looked at it from a straight data standpoint and looked at 26 different categories and didn't have a lot of meaning behind it because they were just a statistical analysis, and then go into the actual narratives of the investigations as well, where we were able to kind of get a little bit more qualitative product out of it. And what we were looking at is some policy recommendations, some training recommendations that we could implement in the field, in academies and in-service training, so that we can potentially reduce the likelihood that we need to use deadly force in the field.
And what were some of the findings? What stands out the most?
I think there were really 4 overarching findings or recommendations that came out of the report. And the first is more training on team tactics. When you have 3, 4, 5, 6 officers on a scene, making sure that we're dividing up responsibilities so that we have officers that are focusing on singular things. So having some officers with a lethal force tool, some officers with a less lethal tool, some officers are going to be just designed to communicate and focusing on that communication between themselves and the subject, so you can make sure that communication is clear and it's concise and that we're actually making that connection with the person, and how we integrate all those parts together. The second thing is we wanted to look at some technologies based on the performance of what we already have currently in the field. So for instance, we have a taser, we refer to as an electronic control weapon, that is relatively ineffective. And so how we can look at different types of taser platforms, because there are multiple that exist, that are going to be more effective in the field and at longer distances. So if you have something that provides more distance, that means that officers can put themselves in positions where they're behind cover and also give themselves more time. And if it's more effective, then the officers have more confidence in using that tool than if it's a low level of effectiveness. So we want to look at some different tools. And then the third thing is looking at how supervision plays into these scenarios, and not just when we get on scene and there's some time where supervisors can be involved and organize, but starting that process when the call is first dispatched, and how supervisors can anticipate what the call potentially is going to need just in terms of tools and resources and personnel, and start getting those resources sent to the scene and kind of strategizing in their mind and verbally over the radio on how we're going to use those tools. So when we get on scene, everybody knows kind of where they want to position themselves and what role they're going to play, and then we can adapt a little bit better instead of figuring that out when it happens on scene. And then the fourth area is things that we're not typically using in high-risk scenarios, how we can utilize those tools. So one example is our mobile intervention team. We're going to start utilizing that team more in some of the higher risk calls for service, or the use of drones. So it's even technology that we haven't typically been using in a patrol environment in higher risk calls. We've been using it in SWAT deployments, but less so in a patrol environment.
And obviously with this coming out, this doesn't exist in a vacuum for us to see as the public. It is happening here in your headquarters, and all of your officers have been aware of this as well. How has morale been affected lately with the release of this? And there's been a lot of pressure on you guys.
Well, we just released it, so not sure I can answer the morale question. But over the course of the last 4 months, certainly since I've taken over, I've placed an emphasis on training. I've been an instructor in the department, for many, many years. That's a high priority to me. That's always a high priority to me. That's why I was an instructor. And so that it kind of has a lot of value. And so that's going to be an emphasis regardless of anything that's happening. We want to have a police department that's highly trained. We want to have a police department that's utilizing the best tools and technology that's available, because it's going to provide the best product to the public.
And even prior to the release though, do you feel that officers have been concerned based on the feedback? We're asking tough questions. How do you think that impacts overall culture here?
That's a difficult question to answer because you're asking me about kind of what their perception is. What I can tell you is, I also place a lot of emphasis on understanding the complicated and complex scenarios that our officers are in. And so trying to appreciate the work, the very valuable work that they do, the high quality work that they do, while also understanding that you can't look at every incident and say there's never any room for improvement. And so balancing the appreciation for the work that they do while also trying to integrate new ways of doing things so we can have the best possible outcome.
See. I think, to my understanding, we talked about, or this has been discussed as a more annual review in the future. Is that correct? And how frequently will these reviews be happening going forward?
Well, every time we have an officer-involved shooting moving forward, we're going to analyze it kind of in the same way that we did this current 15-year analysis. And what I mean by that is we want to be able to take immediate action if we think that there's a change that needs to take place or if there's a lesson learned. So looking back 15 years is helpful, but we don't want to put this on the shelf, make some changes, and then in 5 years do it again. Obviously, officers using deadly force is significant impact on the police department and the community, and so we want to be able to analyze these as each of these cases come up so we can be more responsive.
Okay. And I would love to know a little bit more about the data gathering. Where is the statistical analysis coming from? Who performed that?
We had one of our lieutenants that started going through each one of these cases, and as certain trends or information came up, he'd add another column, and sometimes he had to go back then and look at previous ones so he could answer that question. And it just kind of, as the process went on and as we looked at these individual cases, the data set that we were looking at continued to get more and more expansive so that we could compare all 45 of these incidents together and see how that information related to each other and which one would be in which kind of column, if you will, could potentially impact future incidents.
So this was a review done by an officer with APD?
A lieutenant, yes.
Okay. And is there another outside review coming? I thought that was something that you and Mayor LaFrance discussed as one of the next options for taking action.
Yeah, so we will have an outside entity. We don't know who that is. There's going to be a formal RFP process or a bidding process for an organization to look at our training and our policies. And so they'll come in and take a look at all of our training, from academy training to in-service training, as well as our policies, and provide some recommendations on how we can improve our training as well as improve policies. But that's a process that's going to take several more months before that gets moving and the recommendations start coming in. I mean, potentially, sometime late next year even, depending on how fast it goes. And we just don't want to take the time to wait for that. We're certainly open and want to see what those recommendations are. But if we can identify areas that we make improvements, we're going to make those immediately.
I think for a while we saw a larger increase. Obviously, there's been some attention going toward the increase in officer-involved shootings here. And it seems like there was sort of a spike and then it's gone back to a lull. Is there any particular reason for that?
It would be guessing on my part and speculation. So I certainly don't want to take credit that we now have figured out to how we're never going to have an officer-involved shooting again. But we certainly have started placing some of the lessons that we've learned already into motion. We've had incidents recently where we've seen an increased use of technology, where we've seen supervisors preparing, as I mentioned before, as they're going en route to the scene, providing more officer resources and technological resources. And we do believe that has an impact. Better prepared officers for going into an incident can only lead to better results.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's some body camera footage that we've been waiting for, and it's recently delayed. Is there anything you can speak to on the delay for that?
The delay is based on a request by the Office of Special Prosecution that we not release the body camera video footage. They've publicly made some statements that they're going to try to get their reports just generally out in 60 days. So I would expect that sometime between now and that 60-day mark is when we'll see some sort of decision made by the Office of Special Prosecution.
And what other changes do you think we can expect moving forward with APD? And now that there's an official release of some of this recommendation for training changes and changes to operating procedures, what do you think is the most actionable change coming soon?
Well, you mentioned at the beginning, these types of incidents don't occur in a vacuum. And I think that's really important, that this is a single report and it's a standalone report, but this is one piece of a much broader kind of view of the police department and how we provide police services. And so it's all connected. And how we train our officers in the academy, how we're trained to interact and communicate with members of the public, both when it's in a high-risk scenario to lower level encounters, creates better engagement with the community. And so adding courses within the academy to kind of to improve those communication and engagement encounters, that's another piece that we're continuing moving forward on. We have an academy that starts in a couple of weeks, and that academy is going to have 40 hours of training that did not exist in the last academy. And a lot of that's going to focus on not only helping the officers to understand how they can better engage and interact with the public and the community, how they can de-escalate themselves so they're properly de-escalating the public. Our communication interaction with diverse communities that we have in Anchorage, those are the types of classes we're adding to the academy. That's also going to play into when our officers get into calls for service and they're in people's homes, how they can engage and interact with them better. And that potentially could also result in less uses of force. So everything's kind of connected together. And throughout the course of the year or next year, I think you're going to see us doing some very public things so that we can show the public the changes that we're making and why we're changing them. And then we'll certainly continuously engage with the public on how we can better serve the community.
One thing that I think a lot of people were calling for several months ago was more community involvement, more community conversation. Where are we at with that involvement?
We're engaged in a lot of that, and some of that stuff isn't public. There was a committee meeting that I was at 2 days ago that has a lot of members from the public. That takes place, in City Hall. I have community members that I meet with regularly that I bring into the police station that kind of represent a cross-section of the communities that we have in Anchorage. We discuss policies and we discuss training and things that are going on within the police department as well as within their community. So those types of conversations, even though a lot of them aren't very, very public so that, the average public person can come and attend, those conversations are existing. I think the media, I rely on the media as well to have these types of engagement encounters to talk about the things that are happening within the police department so that there's that method of updating. And then certainly our social media presence, we have photos and we have clips of all the different events and activities that the police department's engaging in so that we can get that information out even if someone's not able to attend those types of events.
On that note, as someone who has probably the most insider view of the department in many ways, what do you wish the public, what do you wish I knew about, I guess, what you're going through right now, and what would you like to inform us of as far as, when we're feeling these feelings about officer-involved shootings? I know you've said several times we don't talk a lot about the calls that do go successfully. Aside from that note, what do you wish more people understood about this issue?
Well, I think this isn't just about what the community needs to understand about us. These officers and these employees are part of this community as well. And so really placing the focus that we're going through this together as a community. This isn't a reactive thing from the police department, or this isn't something where there's a whole body of information that I need the public to understand. This is something that we're all struggling through together. 8 officer-involved shootings is not something that it's not healthy for the community, it's not healthy for us as the police department. And so as we move forward, I think what the message that I really want to get out to the public is that we're going to move forward together. There's going to be a lot of community involvement. We're going to continue to do that. That's obviously a high priority to me. And so, just an understanding from the public that we're going to be out there, we're listening, and we're going to continue to engage and provide a police department that everyone's proud of.
I think something that comes up in these conversations across the country is that people of color are disproportionately affected in officer-involved shootings. Is that something that was taken into account in this report, and how was that analyzed in Anchorage specifically?
So we did look at the race of and ethnicity of the subjects that were involved in officer-involved shootings. And we talk about that a little bit inside the report. We had, I think if my memory is right, about 12% were Black community and about 12% were Alaska Native community. And we're limited a little bit in that data because we're using DMV categories. So there's only really 4 categories that are used when we kind of break down the community, which obviously is not descriptive of what we see here in Anchorage. So that's a limitation when we look at that data, but we certainly analyzed based on how the DMV categorizes race and ethnicity. And that's an important thing to look at. But there's also several other things that are important to look at, like whether or not alcohol plays a factor, or whether or not substance misuse plays a factor in officer-involved shooting. So it's a complex. These scenarios are complex, and certainly a solution or a plan moving forward becomes complex. And we really have to understand all those dynamics as we make a plan or as we provide training to our officers.
And tell me what sticks out to you. Is there anything that was alarming when this report was released? Is there anything that maybe caught you off guard that you weren't expecting to be reported?
No, I don't think there was anything alarming or that caught me off guard. Part of the report talks about national data as it relates to use of force, and we're relatively consistent. There was nothing that is out of the ordinary. I shouldn't say out of the ordinary, but it's an outlier from what you see on a national level. And I will say that with kind of one caveat, that the data for officer-involved shootings is pretty sporadic throughout the country, so there's not a good data set. There's not a consistency among police departments on how they report this information and data, how they collect it and keep it, and how they can pull it back out. So it's not a great data set, but it's consistent with what is available. So that was, I expected that. I think more importantly, we got to go beyond what we're currently doing. When we talk about what's national best practices for training to prepare officers for going to high-risk scenarios, we need to go beyond that. We need to understand that it's not just preparing for those scenarios. There's this whole body of education that can help as well. How we relay the information in a training environment to our officers so they're absorbing as much information and it's more practically used in the field. Like, that's an example of kind of taking it to the next level so we can have that higher expectation for performance from our officers.
Speak to me, as obviously in your official position, but just from your own perspective, I mean, how does it feel to be, this report is out? Do you feel like there's a lot of work ahead, and is that a relief, or is there a lot more anticipation?
I'm proud of the report. I'm proud that we're at a place at the Anchorage Police Department that we can do 15 years of reviewing our data and put that information out there, because it's something that was accessible and available to us 5 years ago and 10 years ago, and we chose not to put it out there. And so looking at this, I think it starts to develop and establish and continue some of the trust that we have in the community. And without that, it's hard to have the community move together and move forward. And so I'm excited about that. In terms of the changes and the things that we need to do to move forward, I'm also excited about that. I don't look at it as a large mountain that we have to climb, because I think as we move forward, we're going to see that the community is going to be more involved and more engaged, and there's going to be more trust, and there's going to be better engagement. So that's exciting to me. So 2 days ago, I think we released our use of force dashboard. So that's going to be a quarterly dashboard that we have. And so that has just some very basic data set that has to do with it's not deadly force, it's all of the use of force that we apply. So you'll have some basic information that we'll put out every quarter. So you'll be able to see certain trends that are happening as it relates to use of force. There's one that'll tune you into to our arrest to force ratio. And that's going to be something that is important, for you as a member of the media to look at. You can look at all the other data points, and they go up and they go down, and what that means to you, you may kind of go, I'm not sure what that means. But force to arrest ratio is an important data set to look at, because that's a single number that will tell you if we're using more or less force when we place people under arrest. And we obviously like to see that number go down a little bit, more compliance from the public, better communication with officers to gain compliance, and that's kind of an important kind of milestone number.